Hare Krishna. Hi Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon satsang. Yesterday was the appearance day of Gadadhar Goswami, which we aren't able to glorify. So today we'll try and glorify this devotee a little bit. So Krishna's Kaviraj described Lord Chaitanya as Radha Bhavadyuti Suvalita, characterized by emotions and bodily luster of Radharani. Gadadhar Das is this duty, this luster. Gadadhar Das is sometimes called the personification of Sri Radhika's divine effulgence. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has basically two groups of associates. One group such as the Dwadash Gopalas, who are Abhiram Gopal, Gauri Das Pandit, Dhananjaya, and others. They serve Sri Nityananda Prabhu in the mood of Sakhya Ras, which is friendship. The second group always stays merged in the mellow of Madhurya Ras, conjugal love, like Gadadhar Pandit. So Sri Gadadhar Goswami is a united form of Chandrakanti Gopi, an expansion of Radharani's effulgence, and Purnananda, an expansion of Lord Balram's dear girlfriend. Thus, Gadadhar Das was an associate of both Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Sri Nityananda Prabhu. While traveling with Lord Chaitanya, Gadadhar would sometimes become absorbed in the Madhurya Prem and begin acting and speaking like a Vraj Gopi, putting a clay pot of Ganga water on his head. As if he were a gopi, he would call out, "Who wants to buy milk? Who wants to buy yogurt?" As one of Lord Nityananda's chief preachers in Bengal, Gadadhar Das delivered countless sinners and yavanas. Once while tasting prema, he began dancing madly and chanting Krishna's holy names outside the Qazi's mansion. The irate Muslim magistrate stormed out of his house to chastise him for disturbing the peace. But beholding the dazzling, attractive form of Gadadhar Das, the Qazi became stunned and dropped his anger. Gadadhar affectionately embraced the Qazi and said, "Gaur Nityananda have appeared to deliver everyone with divine love by distributing the sweet nectar of the holy name of Hari. Why do you chant this sweet name of Hari?" So the Qazi replied, "Tomorrow I shall chant the name of Hari." Hearing the Qazi inadvertently chant the holy name filled Gadadhar with happiness. He said, "Why tomorrow? You have already chanted today, and this powerful name of Hari will destroy your sins and purify your existence." From that day on, the Qazi took shelter of Sri Gadadhar Das Goswami. His samadhi is in the 64 Samadhis area. Okay, so that's all we have by Gadadhar Das. Gadadhar Das Goswami ki jai. Okay, sorry, just bear with me. I'll just have to close this down as well. Okay, and yesterday it was also the appearance day of Srinivas Acharya. So again, who is this great personality? This is a pictorial form of Srinivas Acharya. And this is a murti of him. And this is his samadhi place. So Srinivas Acharya is the embodiment of Lord Chaitanya's love. He's one of the most important personalities in the religious history of Bengal. Also one of the most important Vaishnava teachers in the generation immediately following Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He is chiefly remembered as the illustrious disciple of Gopal Bhatt Goswami and Jiva Goswami. His achievements include delivering the writings of the Goswamis from Vrindavan to Bengal. He converted King Biramba to Vaishnavism, and originating the he started the Manohar style of Kirtan. At Kheturi, Bengal, he co-organized the first Gopunim festival, celebrating the anniversary of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's appearance in this world, while Narottam, Shyamananda, and thousands of other Vaishnavas attended. His parents were Brahman Gangadhar Acharya, and his Dharmapatni was Lakshmi Priya. They lived in a small village of Chakhandi on the banks of the Ganga in the Burdwan district of Bengal. They longed to raise a child who would be a great devotee. Until the birth of Srinivas, they were childless for many years. Gangadhar was himself a great devotee of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He spent much of his time hearing and retelling the stories of Nimai's pastimes with the Lord's intimate associates. In 1510, he could not tolerate the separation any longer. He set out for Navadvip to see the Lord. After only 7 miles as far as the village of Katwa, he learned that Nimai was in that very village taking sannyas, the renounced order of life. So Gangadhar cried, said, "What? Why must my Lord take the renounced order? This austerity is reserved for human beings like me, so we can overcome our attachments to this world. Certainly, there is no need for Nimai, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, to live the harsh life of an ascetic." But Gangadhar's reservations were mixed with excitement. He would soon see the Lord face to face. When he approached the sacrificial area where Nimai was taking sannyas, he saw that the Lord's intimate associates, Nityananda Prabhu, Chandrasekhar, Acharya, Mukundat, and many others were there. He saw Madhushila, the barber, preparing to cut Nimai's beautiful locks of raven black hair. "No," the onlookers were saying, "please stop." They, like Gangadhar, could not conceive of the Lord in the renounced order of life. Even Madhu, who had the good fortune to touch the Lord's head, could cut his hair out of duty only, weeping profusely. Madhu and the others knew that the Lord had decided to set an example for the entire religious world and stressed the importance of renunciation. There was nothing they could do. Keshavbhati, the sannyas guru, gave Nimai his new sannyas name, which is Sri Krishna Chaitanya. The crowd was in shock. Beautiful Nimai is really taking sannyas? They couldn't believe their eyes, from which tears were flowing incessantly, but the deed was done. Madhu fainted. Why had he shaved the Lord's head? It was as if he had been controlled by the Lord's own hand to fulfill the Lord's own desire. Gangadhar found himself calling the Lord's name aloud with uncontrollable enthusiasm. Chaitanya, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, Sri Krishna Chaitanya. He returned to Chakhandi, half mad with ecstasy, unable to stop repeating the Lord's names. He told his wife what had happened, and she too was overcome with ecstasy. As the days passed, the ecstasy increased. The whole town of Chakhandi marveled at Gangadhar's transformation. Seeing Gangadhar's absorption in Sri Chaitanya's name, his wife and the other villagers began calling him Chaitanya Das. Chaitanya Das and his wife went to Jagannath Puri. The Lord Chaitanya had gone after accepting the renounced order. When the couple arrived, they went to Sri Chaitanya and surrendered at his feet. "Lord Jagannath is very happy that you have come here," the Lord said. "Go to the temple and see his deity form. The lotus-eyed Lord is extremely merciful, so please go to see him." Govinda, Lord Chaitanya's personal servant, accompanied Chaitanya Das and his wife to the temple, where they offered many prayers at the feet of Lord Jagannath. Weeping tears of divine love, the happy Brahmin couple were soon escorted to the accommodation Lord Chaitanya had arranged for them. They spent several happy days with Sri Chaitanya in Jagannath Puri. One late day, Lord Chaitanya told his servant of his plans for the couple. "Govinda," the Lord said, "although Chaitanya Das and his wife have not mentioned it to me, I know they would like to have a child. They said so in front of Lord Jagannath, who is not different from me. They have prayed sincerely, and I know their hearts. The desired offspring will soon appear. His name will be Srinivas, and he will be a greatly beautiful child. Through Rupa and Sanatan, I will manifest the Bhakti Shastras, and through Srinivas, I will distribute them. Chaitanya Das and his wife should quickly return to Chakhandi. In Chakhandi, the couple had a beautiful baby boy, whom they named Srinivas. He was born around 1510 on the auspicious full moon day of the month of Vaishak. It was April, May. Lakshmi Priya's father, Balaram Vipra, a learned astrologer, told the happy couple that the son was a Mahapurush, a divine empowered soul. The boy had a broad chest and a long, elegant nose, and his beautiful eyes extended like lotus petals. Like Lord Chaitanya, he had a bodily luster resembling molten gold, and arms extended down to his knees. According to custom, Chaitanya Das and Lakshmi Priya gave charity to the Brahmins, and the Brahmins blessed the child. Lakshmi Priya would constantly sing the glories of Lord Chaitanya into the child's ears, and the melodious sounds made him joyful. As Srinivas grew, he learned to chant the names of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Radha Krishna. Soon the small crescent moon known as Srinivas grew full and was known as the brightest and most beautiful boy in Chakhandi. Srinivas studied under the famed Dhananjaya Vidya Vachaspati. He taught him all branches of Vedic learning, including religion, logic, poetry, political science, grammar, and Ayurveda. According to the Prem Vilas, Dhananjaya Vidya Vachaspati said that he had nothing to teach Srinivas. The Prem Vilas also relates that the goddess of education appeared to Srinivas in a dream and told him that she would make him proficient in all areas of learning, especially the scriptures. Still, Srinivas became known as Dhananjaya Vidya Vachaspati's prized pupil, and as such, he was the pride of Chakhandi. He was loved by all the townspeople who saw him as a precious gem. Because of Srinivas's popularity, he met Narhari Sarkar, an intimate associate of Lord Chaitanya from nearby Srikhandi. Narhari Sarkar's intense devotion had pleased Lord Chaitanya, and Narhari had the distinction of being allowed to sing the Lord's glories in the Lord's presence, although the Lord, out of humility, would not let anyone else do so. This distinction impressed young Srinivas, and he accepted Sri Narhari as his first initiating guru. After meeting Narhari Sarkar, Srinivas began to show signs of ecstasy. Narhari told Srinivas to go to Puri to see Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. While Srinivas was considering how to execute the instruction, his father passed away from this mortal world after 7 days of fever. It was a shock to the family, and Srinivas did all he could to console his mother. Meanwhile, the omniscient Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was preparing his associates for Srinivas's arrival. He already written to Rupa and Sanatan and Gopal Bhatt Goswamis, requesting them to teach Srinivas spiritual life. And he asked Gadadhar Pandit in Jagannath Puri to teach Srinivas the Srimad Bhagavatam. Narhari Sarkar advised Srinivas to see to his mother's care in Jajigram, where her father and brothers had moved from Chakhandi. Then Srinivas was to proceed to Puri to associate with Lord Chaitanya. Srinivas asked Narhari to initiate him into the chanting of Krishna's name. But Narhari told him that Lord Chaitanya wanted him to take initiation from Gopal Bhatt Goswami. Still a boy, Srinivas set out with a companion for Puri. On the way, he learned that Sri Chaitanya had left this world. He was devastated. Then Lord Chaitanya, along with Nityananda Prabhu, had also passed away, appeared to Srinivas in a spiritual vision and consoled him. Still, Srinivas remained grief-stricken. He went to the Gopinath temple in Puri to take shelter of Gadadhar Pandit. Pandit was overcome with separation from Lord Chaitanya, and tears always flowed from his eyes. Srinivas bowed at Sri Gadadhar's feet and introduced himself. Gadadhar Pandit became joyful. "I'm glad you've come and introduced yourself. Just before passing away, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu told me to teach you the Bhagavatam. He knew you would arrive in Puri one day, and he asked me to explain Krishna Leela to you. Gadadhar Pandit's joy, he could now fulfill this order of the Lord, again turned to sadness. I cannot teach you Bhagavad at this time, O young Srinivas, he said, for the manuscript in my possession has become illegible from the tears I have cried onto its pages. Srinivas touched the sacred book to his head and felt ecstasy arise within himself. Nonetheless, the problem of studying a book that had been rendered illegible remained. Sri Gadadhar and Srinivas would not be swayed from their purpose. The will of Mahaprabhu could not be obstructed. Sri Gadadhar sent a message to Narahari Sarkar in Bengal, asking him to secure another manuscript of Srimad Bhagavatam. Narahari replied that another copy was available, that a messenger should be dispatched immediately. Gadadhar sent Srinivas himself and told him to hurry. The separation from Lord Chaitanya was intolerable, he said, and he didn't know how long he could stay in this world. Before leaving, Srinivas fulfilled a long-cherished desire to see Lord Chaitanya's associates. He went to the homes of Ramananda Rai, Sikhi Mahiti, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, Krishna Pandit, Paramananda Puri, Gopinath Acharya, and many others. He also went to see King Parudra. But according to the Bhakti Ratnakar, the king had gone away in solitude to lament the Lord's passing. Seeing his intense and unprecedented love of Godhead, the devotees could understand that he was Gaur Shakti, the embodiment of the energy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. According to the Prem Vilas, Srinivas is an incarnation of Lord Chaitanya's ecstasy. The Lord's intimate associates could naturally perceive this and could understand that through Srinivas, the eternal message of Lord Chaitanya, the message of the Vedic literature, would be widely distributed. Lord Chaitanya had broken open the storehouse of nectarian love of God, and the Goswamis, by writing books, had taken the nectar and placed it in tangible vessels. Srinivas would see that these vessels were circulated among all sincere souls. The intimate associates of the Lord gave Srinivas instructions and advice for carrying on the mission. When Srinivas arrived in Bengal and received a copy of the Bhagavatam from Narahari Sarkar Thakur, he learned that Gadadhar Pandit had passed away. The news was a terrible blow, and Srinivas lamented. Srinivas reflected on the inconceivable will of the Lord. Why had he taken away the person who was to teach him the Bhagavatam? Was there a new plan? Was someone else to teach him the sacred scriptures? Some say that Srinivas felt despondent at this time, but not much is known about the years that followed Sri Gadadhar's passing from this world. It's generally assumed that Srinivas spent this time at first in a heartbroken state, then in serious meditation. He probably continued his studies as he was still in his teens. When Sri Janava Devi, the wife of Nityananda Prabhu, went to Vrindavan, Rupa Goswami asked her to send Srinivas to Vrindavan as soon as possible. So on her return to Bengal, she relayed the message to Narahari. Sri Chaitanya had told the Goswamis of Raj to train Srinivas, and Narahari advised him to hasten to Vrindavan so that the Lord's command could not be violated. The request heightened Srinivas's desire to study bhakti literature with Rupa and Sanatan. Had he gone to Vrindavan then, he would have met Rupa and Sanatan, but he decided to visit the homes of Lord Chaitanya's principal associates on the way, stopping at Navadvip to visit Sri Chaitanya's home. This was the second time Srinivas delayed a journey. First, a journey to learn from Gadadhar Pandit, and now Rupa and Sanatan. Perhaps Srinivas's enthusiasm to associate with Lord Chaitanya's direct followers in Puri and Navadvip was so overwhelming that he was unable to heed the advice of his forebearers. Some say that all of this was the will of Providence, so that Srinivas would take initiation from Gopal Bhatt Goswami. Others say that Srinivas, by his example, was teaching the importance of pilgrimage and association with devotees. Srinivas was enthralled with Mayapur, Navadvip. He met Vishnupriya Devi, the Lord's revered widow, and her esteemed servants, Vamshi Vandan Thakur and Ishan Prabhu. During those days, he watched Vishnupriya Devi perform severe austerities. For example, she would chant the Mahamantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, over each grain of rice she was to eat. When she was finished with her daily chanting, she would eat only the grain she had set aside. Srinivas also met Damodar Pandit, Suklambar, Murari Gupta, and other early friends and intimate associates of Lord Chaitanya and Navadvip. From there, Srinivas went to nearby Shantipur, where he was warmly greeted by Sri Advaita's wife, Sita Thakurani, and her sons Achyuti and Gopal. Then Srinivas visited the house of Nityananda Prabhu in Gadadhar, where Janava Devi, her son Birabhadra, and others greeted Srinivas as if he were part of their own family. But Janava Devi encouraged him to start from Vrindavan without delay, because Rupa and Sanatan would soon rejoin the Lord in the spiritual world. On the way to Vrindavan, Srinivas stopped at the well-known Abhiram Thakur's house in Kanakul Krishnanagar to deliver a letter from Janava Devi. Thakur greeted him with 3 loving lashes from an extraordinary whip. But this unusual greeting was a benediction. The whip, known as Jai Mangal, would bestow love of God on anyone it touched. While continuing his journey, Srinivas stopped at Katwa, where his father had seen Lord Chaitanya adopt the renounced order. Next, he passed through Agradvi, where the 3 famous Ghosh brothers, Vasudev, Govind, and Madhav, had established their temple. Then he proceeded to Acharya, the birthplace of Nityananda Prabhu. Finally, Srinivas made one last stop at Jajigram to say farewell to his aging mother and to visit Narahari Sarkar, his beloved guru. Narahari was concerned about Srinivas's delay in going to Vrindavan and asked him to leave immediately. So without further delay, Srinivas set out for Vraj. By this time, he had achieved adulthood. Meanwhile, Sanatan Goswami had left the mortal world, and Rupa Goswami could not bear the separation. Shri Rupa felt that he too might not survive to instruct Srinivas, so he asked his distinguished disciple and nephew Jiva Goswami to care for Srinivas. Traveling in those days mostly by foot was difficult. Nonetheless, Srinivas was making a determined progress. Stopping briefly on the way to Banaras to visit the house of Chandrasekhar Acharya, where Lord Chaitanya had lived for 2 months. Next, Srinivas reached Prayag and spent the night there. 4 days before arriving in Vrindavan, he heard that Sanatan had passed away 4 months earlier. When he reached Mathura, he learned that Rupa Goswami had passed away only 3 days earlier. Srinivas fell to the ground, crying like a madman. He felt himself the most unfortunate person in the universe. He had failed to meet Lord Chaitanya and to study the Bhagavad with Gadadhar Pandit. Now it failed to meet Rupa and Sanatan. Rupa and Sanatan appeared to him in a dream and encouraged him to proceed to Vrindavan to take shelter of Gopal Bhatt Goswami and to study under Sri Jiva with all his life and soul. So he proceeded towards Vrindavan. He approached Rupa Goswami Govinda Dev, where Jiva Goswami greeted him with warmth and loving hospitality. Then Jiva introduced Srinivas to Gopal Bhatt Goswami, who greeted him with kind words and expressed his disappointment that Srinivas had not arrived sooner, as Rupa and Sanatan had been anxious to meet him. Gopal Bhatt took Srinivas to his Radha Raman temple and asked his deity there to bless him. Gopal Bhatt Goswami and Jiva Goswami gradually introduced Srinivas to the inhabitants of Braj. Gopal Bhatt Goswami initiated Srinivas, and as Jiva Goswami was a preeminent Vaishnava philosopher of the time, Gopal Bhatt directed Srinivas to him for higher instruction, all in accordance with the desires of Lord Chaitanya and Rupa and Sanatan Goswami. The Prem Vilas states that Sri Jiva took care of Srinivas and gave him a thorough spiritual education. Another young scholar, the illustrious Narottam Das, had been studying under Sri Jiva for 1 year when Srinivas arrived in Vrindavan. Narottam had been initiated by Lokadat Goswami, who had sent him to Sri Jiva for additional spiritual instructions. The young Dukhi Krishnadas, later known as Shyamananda, came, sent by his guru, Hridaya Chaitanya. So these 3 young devotees studied under Jiva Goswami with the utmost enthusiasm, became his best students. They were widely known as inseparable friends, Jiva Goswami ordered them to study the forest of Vrindavan with Raghav Pandit, who knew all the sacred groves and their significance. Eventually, Srinivas, Narottama, and Shyamananda were given a special mission. They were to distribute the books of the Goswamis, Bhakti Ras scriptures in Bengal and other areas. Vaishnavism was widely embraced in Bengal, but literature explaining the Vaishnava philosophy was waning. Nityananda Prabhu's wife, Janma Devi, visited Rupa and Sanatan in Vrindavan some years earlier and was well aware of the prolific spiritual literature, the Vrindavan Goswamis, where Rupa, Sanatan, Gopal Bhatt, Raghunath Das, Jiva, and others were producing. So she contacted Jiva Goswami and suggested that the books be sent to Bengal. To comply, Jiva summoned his three best men. Srinivas, Narottama, and Shyamananda did not want to live in Vrindavan, but they understood the importance of their mission. They went to their initiating gurus, who gave their blessings, instilling in them the necessary enthusiasm for the task. Sri Jiva began the preparation for the long and arduous journey. These devotees were his best students, and he would spare no pains for their welfare. He had a rich merchant disciple from Mathura supply a large cart, 4 strong bullocks, and 10 armed guards. The manuscripts were placed in a large wooden chest, which is bolted and covered with waxed cloth. Sri Jiva also secured a special passport from the king of Jaipur for all his 3 students. Then Srinivas, Narottama, and Shyamananda left Vrindavan. After many months, the party reached a small village named Gopalpura, just within the boundaries of the Mala kingdom of one Vishnupura in Bengal. When they retired that night, they felt confident that their mission was almost complete. The king of Vishnupur, Virhambir, was the leader of a strong group of bandits. They were the terror of the adjoining countries. He'd employed a large number of thugs and assassins who infested the highways and killed and robbed wayfarers. The astrologers of the court were ever ready to submit to him confidential reports as to what fortunes the stars would grant him if he carried on robberies in particular localities. So the king's dacoits had been following the cart from afar. This cart was especially interesting because the king's astrologers had said it had a great treasure. Although the dacoits had been following the cart for quite a distance, they thought it wise to wait until the cart reached their own kingdom. The dacoits saw only 15 men escorting the cart, 10 armed soldiers, 2 cartmen, and 3 holy men. The band of dacoits, numbering over 200, inflamed one another's imagination with the astrologer's words. The astrologer had said, "This cart is filled with jewels more valuable than gold." Finally, in Gopalpur, the party spent the night near a beautiful lake. All 15 men slept soundly, tired from the journey. When they awakened, the worst nightmare had come to pass. Manuscripts had been stolen. That not contain their tears, Srinivas, the leader of the party, advised Narottama and Shyamananda to proceed to Bengal and Orissa with the teachings of the 6 Goswamis. He would take it upon himself to retrieve the manuscripts. So he wrote to Jiva Goswami and told him all that had happened. Meanwhile, as King Virhambir was rummaging through treasures stolen from the various travelers, his servants appeared with the court's most recent acquisition. Srinivas's carefully wrapped chest of the most precious jewels. Virhambir dropped everything else and feverishly unwrapped his latest prize. Having heard the prophecies, he could scarcely imagine what splendors awaited him. In one suspenseful moment, he removed the cloth covering and opened the tuck to reveal manuscripts. Where was the priceless treasure? Lifting out the top manuscript in disbelief, the king saw the signature Sri Rupa Goswami written on a palm leaf. When he examined further and began reading Sri Rupa's beautiful exposition of Vaishnava philosophy, he felt something change deep within. He reverently returned the book to the trunk and retired for the evening, aware of the grave sin he had instigated. At night, the king had an unusual dream. He saw a beautiful, effulgent person whose body was filled with divine energy. "Do not worry. Soon I will come to Vishnupur and we will meet. I will retrieve my manuscripts and you will be relieved of all sinful reactions. Your joy will be boundless. Know for certain that you are my eternal servant. I am your eternal well-wisher. Next morning, the king awoke and started his life anew, waiting for the day when the mysterious prediction of his dream would come to pass. Meanwhile, Srinivas Acharya made his way to the outskirts of Vishnupur, where he met a Brahmin resident named Sri Krishna Vallabh. The two became friends and Krishna Vallabh invited Srinivas to his home. Gradually, Krishna Vallabh realized Srinivas's exalted position and surrendered to him as a disciple. In due course, Krishna Vallabh mentioned that the king regularly convened a Bhagavatam study group for all who were interested. Srinivas was curious about the nature of Bhagavatam presentation and asked Krishna Vallabh to take him to the next meeting. When they arrived, Vyasacharya, the court Pandit, was reciting, commenting upon the Bhagavatam. Srinivas was unimpressed but said nothing. The next day they found Vyasacharya pontificating in the same fashion. After 2 weeks of the court Pandits, Srinivas could not contain himself. After the meeting, he spoke to Vyasacharya. You, sir, do not follow the text, said Srinivas. Nor are your commentaries in line with Sridhar Swami or other standard exponents of Bhagavad philosophy. Vyasacharya listened to Srinivas's comments but ignored his advice. The king, however, who was nearby, overheard what was said and found it interesting. The next day at the recital, Vyasacharya again attempted to elucidate the esoteric section of Bhagavatam that delineates Sri Krishna's Ras Leela. Respectful but firm, Srinivas interrupted with a question. Sir, can you comment on such confidential subjects without referring to the statements of Sridhar Swami? You're obviously unfamiliar with his work. Vyasacharya became angry. He disliked being challenged in front of his psychopathic assembly, who were accustomed only to his peculiar rendition of Bhagavatam commentary. Before another word was said, however, the king began to defend Srinivas's position. How is it that this Brahmana scholar finds fault with your explanations? Perhaps your interpretations are questionable. Who can interpret the text better than I? The arrogant Vyasacharya replied. This newcomer is an upstart, and he dares to question me in the presence of your majesty. Then he turned to Srinivas. If you are such an authority in the Bhagavatam, he said, why don't you come sit here and explain these verses in a better way? Srinivas rose to the challenge. He sang the Bhagavatam verses beautifully and then commented upon them with great verve and authority. He drew upon existing Vaishnava explanations and yet offered his own unique presentation. No one had ever heard such a masterly enunciation of Bhagavad philosophy. The king encouraged him to go on, allowing him to speak several hours. When he finished, the whole assembly applauded, ecstatic with Srinivas's contagious love for Krishna. Vyasacharya could not believe his ears. He was defeated, but he was happy. King Virambara was greatly moved. No one has ever come to this kingdom and shared so much love and scholarship in the way you have, he said to Srinivas. Please tell me your name and where you come from. My name is Srinivas and I am native of this country, said Srinivas. I came here to see a magnificent court and to relish the Bhagavatam. The king then gave him the best accommodation in the palace and asked him to stay as long as he liked. Later that evening, the king asked Srinivas to dine with him. But Srinivas said that he took only one humble meal per day and had already eaten. Nonetheless, Virambir encouraged him to have some fruit, and he complied, not wanting to offend his distinguished host. As Srinivas ate his fruit, the king sat at his side like a humble servant. The king had never felt this way by anyone. Srinivas was that effulgent person he had seen in the dream, his guru. He wanted to render some menial service. That night, he heard Srinivas repeating the name of Krishna in his room. It seemed as if Srinivas did not sleep. Here is a genuine saint, thought the king. He is simply absorbed in the name of God. With this pleasant idea, the king fell asleep. listening to Srinivas Acharya's blissful voice in the next room. The following day, in the great assembly, Srinivas again spoke from the Bhagavatam. Once again, the eager, expectant audience relished every word. Srinivas astonished all who listened. Chroniclers of the event have reported that even the stone walls of the hall seemed to melt with emotion. Srinivas spoke with erudition, sensitivity, and devotion, honoring his Vaishnava predecessors. And everyone present agreed that the wisdom of the orator far exceeded his years. One by one, people came and bowed at Srinivas's feet, hoping to become his disciple. Okay, I think we're going to run over time, so we can stop here for today. Srinivas Acharya ki jai. Anyone like to make any comments?